Well, Ryan, Governor Ducey's decision to reopen more Arizona businesses comes as many new numbers show there's been another spike in confirmed cases. There are now close to 9,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in our state. Now, more than 4,700 of those cases are in Maricopa County. It seems like the numbers are not going down, which has lawmakers thinking about the upcoming primary, which is just a few months away. So Maricopa County election officials are now proposing opening more voting centers ahead of the August primary. The goal is to keep in-person voters at a safe distance from one another, according to CDC guidelines. The proposal was outlined in a meeting with county officials yesterday, but there will not be a final decision until next month. Meanwhile, health officials have discovered a cluster of COVID-19 cases at an all-girls high school near Prescott Valley. 40 students at Migas Mountain Academy tested positive. So the boarding school is for at-risk girls, some in foster care. Well, last week, 2 students went to the ER for treatment and were later released. The county then tested 60 girls living in the same dorm and found 40 additional cases. 2 staff members also tested positive. The school tells 12 News the affected students are being isolated. Governor Ducey is cracking down on long-term care facilities and is now requiring that they contact families immediately if their loved one contracts COVID-19. The same rules apply if your loved one is in a facility where someone else is confirmed to have the virus. And this call all comes after an outcry from families about a lack of transparency from the governor's office. Ryan?
Well, Rachel, some of the country is certainly begging to reopen at this point, and it's a harsh reality is what's coming here, as experts show that we're not out of the woods yet. Now, new numbers from a government report predict by June 1st, the daily death toll could be up to nearly 3,000 a day. Right now, according to Johns Hopkins University, more than 68,000 people have already died from the coronavirus. People are recovering, but there are still a lot of deaths. Now, experts say the number of cases and deaths will spike as more states begin to relax their stay-at-home orders. All hope not lost, though. Doctors and researchers are working around the clock to find a cure, and President Trump says there should be a vaccine by the end of the calendar year. Experts say that goal is not impossible, but it's more likely going to take longer than that.
I don't think we should have magical thinking that we're going to have a vaccine in the matter of weeks or months.
Now, there is some good news here. 6 vaccines are already being tested in human clinical trials, and dozens more are in development right now.